I used to think loneliness was loud, like crying in empty rooms or staring at your phone waiting for a message that never comes. I didn't know it could be this quiet, this heavy, the kind that sits with you at night and whispers things you've been trying not to hear. The first night I moved in, I lay awake longer than I should have. Not because the place was unfamiliar, but because it was too familiar. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that reminds you you're alone even when you're not. That's when it hit me. There was someone in the next room. I didn't know their name. I didn't know what they looked like. I didn't even know why they were here, sleeping just a few feet away, separated from me by a thin wall and an even thinner line of circumstance. All I knew was that a stranger was breathing in the dark while I stared at the ceiling, pretending I wasn't listening. It was a temporary situation. That's what I kept telling myself. A short-term living arrangement, just until things settled. Just until life made sense again. I wasn't supposed to care. I wasn't supposed to notice. But at 1:47 a.m., when the house creaked softly and I heard the faint sound of someone shifting in their sleep, my chest tightened in a way I didn't expect. There is something unsettling about knowing how close another human being is when you at your most vulnerable. No walls of personality yet. No history. No context. Just two people, alone in separate rooms, carrying whatever they brought with them into the night. I wondered who they were. Were they lonely? Or were they the kind of person who fell asleep easily, without their thoughts turning against them? Did they come here running from something like I did? Or were they just passing through, untouched, unburdened? I hated that my mind kept going there. I rolled onto my side, facing the wall between us. It felt ridiculous, almost dramatic, to be aware of someone I hadn't even met. But the awareness wouldn't leave. It hovered. A presence without a face. I told myself it didn't matter. Strangers sleep near each other all the time. Hotels, apartments, cities packed wall to wall with people who never speak. Proximity doesn't mean connection. Knowing someone is there doesn't mean they matter. And yet, the night felt different knowing I wasn't the only one awake. I thought about all the nights before this one. Nights spent completely alone. No sounds but my own breathing. No reminders that life existed beyond my thoughts. I used to think that was peace. Now, listening to the subtle noises from the other side of the wall, I wasn't so sure. There was a soft thud. Maybe they dropped something. Then silence again. I felt a strange mix of irritation and comfort. Annoyed that my solitude had been interrupted, relieved that it had. I don't know when I fell asleep. I just know that when I did, it wasn't with the usual heaviness pressing down on my chest. It was lighter, not happy, just less alone. The next morning, I didn't see them. I heard movement, a door opening and closing, the sound of someone leaving in a hurry, and just like that, the house returned to being quiet in the way I was used to. But something had changed. I carried that awareness with me throughout the day, at work, on the drive home, in the pauses between conversations, the knowledge that when night came again, someone would be back in the next room. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself strangers stay strangers. I told myself not to read into things that weren't there. But that night, as I lay in bed again, waiting for sleep, I realized something unsettling. I was listening, not because I wanted noise, but because I wanted proof that someone else was there. And that was the first moment I should have known this wasn't going to stay insignificant. The second night was worse, not louder, not more uncomfortable, just more aware. I tried to distract myself, watched a show I wasn't really watching, scrolled through my phone until my eyes hurt, did all the usual things people do when they're trying not to think. But when the lights went out and the house settled into that familiar nighttime stillness, my attention drifted right back to the same place, the wall. At first, there was nothing, just the soft hum of the fridge down the hall and the distant sound of traffic outside. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing the night before. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Quiet. Careful. Like someone trying not to be heard. The sound traveled from their room toward the bathroom, then stopped. A door clicked shut. Water ran briefly, then cut off. I sighed, irritated with myself for noticing every detail. Why did it matter? I turned onto my other side, pulling the blanket up to my chin, trying to block it out. But the awareness lingered, the knowledge that someone else was moving through the same space, living a parallel night just a few feet away. It felt invasive and oddly comforting. A cough followed. Soft. Suppressed. The kind people make when they don't want to disturb anyone else. That did something to me I didn't expect. They were being careful. I frowned at the ceiling, annoyed at my own thoughts. This was ridiculous. They weren't being considerate of me. They were just living their life. I was projecting meaning onto nothing. Still, I listened. There was a shuffle, the faint creak of a bed, then silence. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the noise had, like the house was holding its breath. I realized something uncomfortable then. I wasn't waiting for silence. I was waiting for proof of life. That realization sat with me longer than I liked. I'd lived alone before. I knew the rhythm of empty spaces, the predictable calm of nights that belonged only to me. But this was different. The house felt shared now, even without interaction. And sharing space, even accidentally, changes things. I remembered something I'd read once, how people in big cities often feel less lonely, knowing there are lights on in nearby apartments, even if they never speak to the people inside. How presence alone can ease the mind. I used to think that was nonsense. Now, lying there in the dark, listening for sounds from the next room, I wasn't so sure. At some point music started playing faintly. So low it was barely there, just enough to tell me they were awake too. I couldn't make out the song, only the soft rhythm beneath it. I felt a strange pull in my chest. What were they listening to? Something sad, something comforting. Something that helped them sleep. I wondered if they were lying in bed thinking the same things I was. Wondered if they were aware of me at all. If they knew there was another person just beyond the wall. listening to the night unfold. The thought made my stomach twist. I rolled onto my back, staring into the dark, my thoughts drifting despite my best efforts. I thought about how easily people slip into each other's lives without trying, how proximity alone can create familiarity, how sharing space, even silently, can blur lines you didn't plan to cross. I didn't want this to matter. I wanted the stranger next door to remain exactly that, a stranger. A temporary presence, a background detail in a chapter of my life. I didn't plan to reread, but when the music stopped and the house went quiet again, I felt something like disappointment. And that scared me, because disappointment means expectation. An expectation means attachment. An attachment, that's where things start to hurt. I checked the clock. 2:03 a.m. Too late to be overthinking. Too early for sleep. I wondered how long they would be staying. Days, weeks, long enough for this feeling to deepen, or just long enough to remind me what it felt like not to be completely alone. Eventually, exhaustion won. My thoughts blurred. The wall faded back into just a wall. But before I drifted off, I heard one last sound. A soft laugh. Quick, almost involuntary. I froze. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be shared. It was private. A moment that wasn't for me. And yet, it stayed with me. Because it was warm, human, real. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I fell asleep thinking about the stranger in the next room, not as an inconvenience, but as a presence. The first time I actually saw them, it wasn't planned. It was one of those half-awake mornings where the world feels slightly out of focus, like your body showed up before your mind did. I pattered into the kitchen in socks, hair still a mess, eyes barely open, fully expecting the house to be empty. It wasn't. They were standing by the counter, back turned, pouring coffee like they'd done it 100 times before, like they belonged there. The smell hit me first, fresh coffee, warm and familiar, and then the realization landed that they say them. I froze for half a second, unsure whether to retreat quietly or announce myself. Too late. They turned around. "Oh, hey," they said, surprised but not startled. Their voice sounded exactly how I imagined it would. Calm, slightly tired, real. "Hey," I replied, mentally kicking myself for how unprepared I felt, for how aware I suddenly was of everything: my posture, my expression, the awkward silence stretching between us. We stood there, two strangers caught in an unscripted moment, both clearly unsure how to proceed. "I didn't realize anyone else was up," they said, gesturing vaguely with their mug. "Yeah," I replied. "Shame. Shame. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." They smiled, just a little, and something in my chest loosened without permission. "I'm, usually grab coffee early," they added. "Hope that's okay?" "Totally," I said quickly. "I mean, it's a shared kitchen." Another pause. Less awkward this time. Still cautious. They nodded. I noticed small things then. The way they leaned slightly against the counter, like mornings weren't their favorite either. The faint circles under their eyes, the quiet politeness in their movements, like they were trying not to take up too much space. It made me strangely aware of my own presence. "I'm only here temporarily," I blurted out, immediately regretting it. Why did I feel the need to clarify that? "Same," they said, a little amused. "Life in between places." That phrase stuck with me. Life in between places. It sounded like more than just housing. "Well," they added, lifting their mugs slightly, "nice to officially meet you." "Yeah," I said. "You too." And that was it. No dramatic introduction, no sparks, no cinematic moment. Just two people acknowledging each other's existence in a quiet kitchen. They left shortly after, a quick nod, a soft "have a good day," and the door clicked shut behind them. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the space they'd occupied, the air still warm from their presence. Nothing had happened, and yet something had. The rest of the day felt off in small, unexplainable ways. I replayed the encounter in my head while answering emails. Wondered if ED sounded awkward, if they'd noticed how tired I looked, if they'd thought anything of the moment at all. Probably not, I told myself. It was nothing. But that night, when I crawled into bed, the sounds from the other side of the wall felt different, familiar, anchored to a face. Now, a voice. A person who stood barefoot in the same kitchen I did. I heard them moving around, opening drawers, running water. The soft thud of a door closing. Instead of irritation, I felt curiosity. I wondered what their day had been like, if they were as tired as they'd looked, if life in between places had worn them down the way it had me. The music started again, faint and low. This time, I didn't try to ignore it. I listened, not to the song but to what it meant. Another human winding down, another person ending their day in the same house, carrying their own quiet weight into the night. At some point, laughter drifted through the wall again. Softer this time, like a smile someone didn't realize they were wearing. I smiled too, before I could stop myself. That scared me more than anything else, because it meant the stranger wasn't just a presence anymore. They were a person, and once someone becomes a person in your mind, it's harder to pretend they don't matter. I fell asleep wondering when I'd see them again, and whether that question alone meant I was already in deeper than I wanted to admit. After that first accidental meeting, the house felt different. Not warmer, not happier, just aware. Like the space itself had registered that two separate lives were now intersecting more than they had before. I noticed it in the way I hesitated before stepping into the kitchen, listening for movement, in the way I lingered a second longer in common spaces, half expecting to see them again. And I did. Not immediately. Not dramatically just in pieces. A mug left drying on the rack that wasn't mine, a jacket draped over the back of a chair, a pair of shoes by the door I hadn't noticed before. Small signs of someone else's existence weaving quietly into my own. We started crossing paths without meaning to. Once, early in the morning, when neither of us had fully woken up yet, we exchanged tired smiles and nods. No words needed. Another time, late in the evening, when I was heating leftovers and they passed through, pausing just long enough to ask, "Long day." Before, continuing on. "Yeah," I said. "You." They nodded. "Same." And somehow, that was enough. There was no effort to push the conversation further. No awkward attempts at friendliness, just brief, human moments that settled gently and moved on. It felt respectful, safe. I didn't realize how much I needed that. One night, I came home later than usual. The house was quiet, lights low, that familiar stillness waiting for me. I assumed they were already asleep. Then I heard it, the sound of a chair moving. A soft sigh. They were in the living room, sitting with a book in their lamp casting a warm glow around them. They looked up when I entered, surprised but not uncomfortable. "Oh," they said. Hey, I replied, dropping my bag by the door. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," they said quickly. "I was just avoiding my thoughts." That made me pause. "Same," I admitted before I could overthink it. They smiled. "Not big." "Who's?" I grabbed a glass of water and lingered longer than necessary. Neither of us sat down. Neither of us moved away. We just existed in the same space for a few quiet seconds. "Long day?" they asked again. "Yeah," I said. "One of those days where you're tired before it even starts." They nodded slowly. "Those are the worst." We didn't talk much after that. A few comments here and there. Nothing personal. Nothing deep. But when I finally went to my room, the silence felt different. Less empty. Over the next few days, it continued like that. Small, unplanned moments. Casual conversations that didn't linger, but didn't feel rushed either. We learned tiny things about each other without trying. They took their coffee black. I added too much sugar. They stayed up late. Reading, I stayed up late thinking. They worked odd hours. So did I once. I mentioned being tired, and they sighed. "You always look tired." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to be comforting?" They laughed softly. "No, and kust." Familiar. That word? Again. Familiar. It surprised me how quickly it felt true. I caught myself listening for them when I got home, not in an obsessive way, just a quiet awareness. If I heard movement, I felt grounded. If I didn't, the house felt larger, emptier. That realization unsettled me. I didn't want to need someone's presence to feel okay. I'd worked hard to convince myself I was fine on my own, independent, self-contained, safe. And yet, this stranger, this person I barely knew, was slowly slipping into the background of my life in a way that felt natural, unforced, almost inevitable. One night, as we passed each other in the hallway, they stopped. "Hey," they said, "I'm glad you moved in." The words were simple, casual, but they landed heavier than they should have. "Yeah," I replied after a moment. "Me too." I went to bed that night with my thoughts louder than usual. Because liking someone's presence isn't dangerous, but noticing when it's missing, that's where things start to change. And I could feel it happening. Quietly, slowly, whether I wanted it to or not. At first, I didn't like them. Not exactly dislike, but that quiet awareness of someone else in the house made me tense, irritated. Every little noise seemed amplified. Footsteps across the wooden floor, the clink of a mug, the rustle of sheets. It was like living with someone else had turned up the volume of life, and I wasn't ready for it. I found myself glaring at the walls sometimes, like I could will them to disappear with my eyes, laughing too loud at the TV just to reclaim my space, rolling my eyes at their music too. Soft, too loud, always slightly in the wrong rhythm, and yet, somehow, I noticed when it wasn't there. One evening, I got home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. No soft footstep outside the bedroom. No distant sigh that always made me feel like someone else was sharing the night with me. It was startling. The absence wasn't neutral, it was loud. I realized, in a way that scared me, that I missed them. Not the noise exactly, not the sound. Their presence, their existence, just a wall away, had started to matter in a way I hadn't anticipated. I shook my head. Ridiculous, I muttered aloud. Of course, it was ridiculous. I barely knew them. They were a stranger, someone who had walked into my life without asking permission and without ceremony, was now becoming part of my rhythm. I couldn't explain how it happened. One day, footsteps were annoying. The next, they were comforting. One day, the faint laugh through the wall made me roll my eyes. The next, I listened for it. I tried to ignore it. I busied myself with work, with errands, with anything that didn't involve thinking about who was sleeping next door. I avoided the kitchen at peak times. I stayed up later so I wouldn't run into them. I told myself over and over that this wasn't important. It was. One night, I got caught. I wasn't supposed to be in the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water when I heard them behind me. Their presence was there before I even saw them. "Oh," they said, surprised, but not alarmed. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I muttered. "Can't sleep." "Me neither," they replied, and I noticed the softness in their voice, the way it didn't carry judgment, just acknowledgement. For a moment, I almost walked away. I almost pretended I wasn't affected. But we stood there, two people in a shared space, neither wanting to overstep, neither wanting to leave. We exchanged a few words about our day, mundane things, work, traffic, coffee. The kind of small talk that becomes meaningful because of the presence behind it. And then they left the room. I realized I had been holding my breath, not consciously, not even knowing I was waiting. But the moment they disappeared, the quiet was noticeable. My chest felt hollow. I didn't want to admit it to myself. Not then. Not ever. But I thought about that empty kitchen later, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I knew I was aware of them in a way that went beyond irritation or curiosity. I liked their presence. I liked it more. The next morning, I caught myself glancing toward the bedroom door more often than necessary, listening for the faint noises of movement, hoping subtly that they'd be there when I crossed the hallway. I hated myself for it. It felt fragile. It felt like a trap. Because liking someone you barely know, someone you aren't supposed to be close to, it comes with risk. The kind you can't measure until it's too late. Yet, somehow, I couldn't stop. That was when I realized the truth. The stranger in the next room was no longer just a stranger. They were part of my life in a way I hadn't expected, in a way I couldn't control. And I was terrified, because once you notice someone that deeply, once they become part of the rhythm of your life, the thought of losing them is unbearable. Even if you've only just met them, even if they're just sleeping in the next room, even if it's supposed to mean nothing, it already meant everything. That night was different. It started like any other. I came home, drained, exhausted, every muscle complaining about the day. I wanted nothing but silence, isolation, and the comfort of my own thoughts. But the house wasn't empty. I heard them first. The soft shuffle of a chair, a sigh, a breath, that small human noise that somehow made the walls feel smaller, the rooms warmer. I froze. Because I wasn't ready. I told myself I wasn't ready for any of this. For noticing someone else. For allowing another person to share the space in a way that mattered. For letting feelings creep in like an uninvited guest. And yet, I found myself drawn toward them. I didn't know why. I don't think I wanted to. "Hey," I said quietly, stepping into the living room. They looked up, surprised, but not shocked. Their eyes were soft, warm, a little tired. The kind of eyes that make you want to tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient. "Hey," they replied. We both said, unsure what to say, unsure how to fill the silence. I had a rough day, I admitted, before I could stop myself. They nodded, slow and understanding. Yeah, I said again. Just everything. I don't know why I said it. I rarely admitted that. I rarely let someone hear the weight pressing on me without minimizing it first. But tonight, for reasons I couldn't explain, I did. They didn't comment. They didn't try to fix it. They just sat there. Present, attentive, human. And that presence, it was a gift. I felt a crack in my armor that I hadn't realized was there. A crack that had formed slowly over days of noticing them, hearing them, sharing this strange, silent house. "I get it," they said finally, softly. "Some days you just can't pretend." Exactly. That was what I wanted to hear. Not solutions, not advice. Just acknowledgement. Recognition that my struggle was valid, real, and seen. I exhaled, relief mingling with an unexpected warmth. "Thanks." "No problem," they replied, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had happened. We sat in silence for a while. Not awkward, not forced, just quiet and alive, listening to the faint creaks of the house, the hum of the fridge, the subtle presence of one another. It wasn't romantic, not yet. But it was intimate, more intimate than I had felt with anyone in a long time. I realized something that night. Connection doesn't always start with grand gestures or meaningful declarations. Sometimes it begins quietly, slowly, between the beats of ordinary life, in shared spaces, in listening and being heard. And that's what we were doing, without meaning to, Without planning it, we had started to build trust, to share pieces of ourselves that we didn't even realize were missing. I noticed small things about them, the way they exhaled when stressed, the little gestures they made when thinking, the patterns of their night routine, all the tiny details that start to matter more than they should. And they noticed me too. I could tell by the way they listened, by the softness in their voice, by the way the house seemed to shrink when we were in the same room. It scared me. I wasn't supposed to let people in. I wasn't supposed to rely on anyone. I wasn't supposed to care. And yet, there it was. Care, unplanned, unwanted in theory, but desperately craved in reality. We didn't say more than a few words after that, but something had shifted. The distance that had existed for nights, the wall between us, the quietness, the separation had started to collapse. Not fully. Not yet. But enough that I could feel it. Enough that I knew life in this temporary space would never be the same. Because when someone listens to the raw, unfiltered weight of your day without judgment, they become more than a stranger. They become a presence. A presence that starts to matter. A presence that lingers. A presence you start to hope will never leave. And for the first time, I realized I was hoping, not casually, not politely, but fully, dangerously, awake to the. After that night, nothing went back to normal. Not in an obvious way. The house didn't suddenly feel charged or dramatic. We didn't start lingering in doorways or stealing glances like characters in a movie. But the quiet had changed its meaning. Silence no longer meant distance. It meant comfort. We started spending more time in the same rooms without announcing it. I'd sit on one end of the couch, scrolling on my phone, pretending not to notice when they sat on the other side with a book. Sometimes we wouldn't speak for an hour, and yet, when one of us got up to leave, it felt like something unfinished was left behind. Once, they laughed softly at something on their screen. "What?" I asked, without looking up. "Nothing," they said. "Just a memory." That word landed heavy. I almost asked more, almost opened a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through, but I didn't. And neither did they. We were both careful. Careful not to assume. Careful not to rush. Careful not to name what was slowly forming between us. But even careful people can't ignore the truth forever. One evening, there was a storm. The kind that creeps in without warning. Rain tapping against the windows like it's asking permission to be let in. The lights flickered once, then twice. "Great," I muttered from the kitchen. They appeared behind me, closer than I expected. Power might go out. As if on cue, everything went dark. For a second the world felt suspended. No hum of electricity. No background noise. Just rain, breath, and the faint awareness of each other standing there. "I've got candles," I said. "So do I," they replied. Almost at the same time, we laughed. Quietly, nervously, we lit the candles together in the living room. Soft, uneven light filled the space, turning ordinary shadows into something intimate, something honest. We sat not too close. Not too far. "This feels strange," they said eventually. "Yeah," I replied, "but not bad." They nodded. Not bad at all. The storm outside grew louder. Rain against glass, wind curling around the house like it was trying to listen in. I don't usually like storms, I admitted. Why? They asked. They remind me how small everything is. They were quiet for a moment, then softly. I think that's why I like them. I turned toward them because they make things feel small. No, they said, because they make everything else quiet. That hit me harder than I expected. We talked then not about love, not about feelings, but about life. About how both of us had ended up here temporarily, about how nothing felt permanent anymore, how strange it was to exist in between chapters. I didn't plan for my life to look like this, I said. Me neither, they replied, but maybe that's not always a bad thing. I wanted to believe that. At some point, the rain soft, the power came back. The lights flickered on. Neither of us moved. I should probably go to bed, they said finally. Yeah, I replied. Me too. They stood, hesitated, looked at me like there was something unsaid sitting between us, heavy and alive. Good night, they said. Good night, I answered. I watched them walk down the hallway. I didn't follow. I didn't call out. I didn't cross that invisible line, but I felt it. The pull, the quiet ache of wanting something I wasn't sure I was allowed to want. That night, lying in bed, the rain had stopped, but my thoughts hadn't. I thought about how close we'd been in the dark, how natural it felt. How dangerous that comfort was becoming, because once you start wanting someone's presence in the quiet moments when there is nothing to distract, you're already in too deep and the cneo italiano. The stranger in the next room wasn't just important anymore. They were becoming. After that storm night, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Not in a romantic hearts and fireworks way, not even consciously. It was quieter than that, subtle, persistent, like a low hum under everything I did, the kind that sneaks up in the middle of work, into shower, even when the world is loud and crowded. I realized I was afraid. Afraid of caring, afraid of noticing. Afraid of feeling something that wasn't supposed to exist, because this wasn't supposed to matter. They were a stranger. I had no reason to want them in my life beyond the walls we shared. Yet somehow, I did. It wasn't just the way they moved or spoke. It was the comfort they carried quietly into the house, the rhythm they added to nights that used to feel endless. The strange sense of safety their presence created, and that scared me more than anything else. I tried to pull back. I avoided the kitchen at the times I usually saw them. I stayed up later, pretending to work on projects I didn't care about. I whispered to myself that boundaries were important, that attachment was dangerous, that Primera called NAT. Let this grow into something I might lose. It didn't work, because the mind doesn't obey warnings like that. One evening, I returned home earlier than usual. The house was empty, or at least I thought it was. I grabbed a glass of water, trying to convince myself I didn't care who was in the next room. And then I heard it. Footsteps, soft, careful, approaching. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. They appeared in the kitchen doorway. Our eyes met. Hey, they said, voice light. like nothing unusual was happening. "Hey," I replied, trying not to sound too eager. There was a pause, heavy with all the unspoken things. "I didn't mean to startle you," they added. "You didn't," I said too quickly. My throat felt tight. We stood there in silence. Not awkward, not tense, but charged, full of the things neither of us dared to say. I've been thinking. I started, then stopped, realized I didn't want to admit anything. Not yet. Not in the open kitchen. They didn't press, just nodded, a quiet signal that they were listening. That presence again, that patience that was starting to feel like a lifeline. Primera turned away, pouring water into a glass, fighting the ache that had taken root in my chest. It was ridiculous. I hated that I needed their presence. I hated that I noticed when they weren't there. I hated how familiar everything about them had become in a space meant to be temporary. Yet, when they smiled, just slightly, the tension in my chest eased just a little, and that terrified me. Because I knew I wasn't just observing them anymore. I was emotionally invested. Not in some dramatic declaration way, not in a grand gesture way, just quietly, dangerously, unavoidably invested. I spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of their breathing through the wall. It should have annoyed me. It should have been inconvenient. It wasn't. It was comforting, and that scared me more than anything else. Because once you rely on someone in the silence when the world is asleep, when your thoughts are loud, when the darkness presses in you've already crossed the line. You've already let them matter. And the stranger in the next room mattered more than they should. More than I was ready to admit. I didn't want to feel it. I didn't want to need them. But the truth sat there, heavy and undeniable. They were becoming essential. And that fear, the fear of attachment, of caring, of losing them before anything began, it was starting to consume me. That night, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just afraid of being close. I was afraid of wanting them in ways I wasn't supposed to. Because once you start wanting a stranger in the quiet moments, the walls you built around yourself begin to crumble, and there was no going back. It happened slowly. But that day it hit me like a punch I hadn't been prepared for. They weren't there. Not absent in the usual, predictable way, when work or errands took them out for a few hours. No, this was different. Today, the room felt heavier, the house larger, the walls stretched farther apart than they ever had. I noticed every missing sound. No shuffle of sheets, no quiet sighs, no faint laughter through the wall. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed colder, more distant, as if the absence had stretched through everything. At first, I tried to tell myself it was fine. I told myself they had things to do, responsibilities, lives beyond the temporary walls we shared, that it didn't matter, that my chest wasn't. It was every small task I did that day reminded me of them. Every clink of a cup on a table, every creak of the wooden floorboard, every pause in the house's rhythm screamed their absence. It was startling, because it wasn't supposed to matter. They were just a stranger, just someone who had moved into the next room temporarily. Nothing permanent, nothing official, nothing that should affect me. And yet, here I was, pacing the living room, realizing with a jolt of fear that the house had grown colder without them. By noon, I was talking to myself, half laughing, half scolding, trying to reclaim my sense of reason. It's fine. They're just out. It's nothing. Stop overthinking. It didn't work. The quiet was too loud. Their absence was too sharp. I realized I was used to them being there, and I didn't like how used to them I had become. By the afternoon, I was almost frantic. Every little noise made me look up, hoping they'd appear in the doorway. A creak in the hall, a faint rustle outside, anything. Nothing. It hurt, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but quietly, persistently, a dull ache that rested under my ribs and refused to leave. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall that separated our rooms, and admitted it to myself for the first time. Primera mistem. The words felt absurd on my tongue, ebbing silently. I barely knew them. I hadn't even had the first proper conversation, not really. And yet, the absence left a hole in the house, in the night, in me. It was terrifying. Because acknowledging that feeling meant I had crossed a line I didn't know existed. I had let someone's presence become important. I had let them matter in a way that wasn't casual or temporary. By the time evening rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves. I wasn't hungry. I couldn't focus. Every small sound made me tense, listening for the familiar shuffle of steps, the low hum of a voice I'd grown accustomed to. When they finally returned, I froze. The moment the door clicked open, I felt my chest loosen and tighten, all at once. Relief, guilt, panic, joy, embarrassment, all bundled into one chaotic tangle of emotion. They carried groceries, unaware of the storm their absence had stirred in me. "Hey!" they said casually, dropping bags on the counter. "Hey," I replied, too quickly, my voice betraying more than I wanted. For a moment, we just looked at each other. No words, no explanations, just the weight of shared space and shared absence between us. I wanted to say something, anything, to tell them how empty the house felt without them, but I didn't, because saying it would make it real, make it obvious. Admit that I had crossed the invisible line from tolerance to reliance, from noticing to needing, and I wasn't ready. Yet, in the quiet moments that followed, I realized something I could no longer ignore. The stranger next door had become essential, not just for noise, not just for company, for presence, for warmth, for grounding. I didn't know when it happened, didn't know how, didn't want to. I just knew that the house felt wrong without them, and that the thought of losing them even temporarily hurt more than I expected it to. That's when I understood. Attachment doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, slowly, in the absence you can't ignore and the presence you can't dismiss. And by the time I went to bed that night, staring at the wall, I admitted it to myself fully. I cared. I wanted them there. Not as a stranger, not as a temporary neighbor, but as someone who had begun to matter more than I was willing to admit. And that realization though frightening, felt like the first step towards something I... That night, everything felt louder. Not the sounds of the house, not the creaks, the hum, the faint tapping of rain against the windows. No, it was the silence between us that spoke the loudest. I hadn't meant to be in the living room when they returned from work, but there I was, half-empty mug in hand, leaning against the counter, like I belonged, like I wasn't waiting, which, in a way, I was. They walked in carrying their bag, tired but steady. Their eyes met mine, and I felt that familiar pull, the quiet weight of attention, the invisible thread, drawing us together. Long day, I asked, trying to sound casual. They shrugged. Yeah, you same. And there it was, the usual response. Polite, safe, routine. But tonight, it didn't feel routine. I realized I could no longer pretend that our shared space was neutral, temporary, unimportant, because it wasn't. It had stopped being neutral the moment I first heard them breathe through the wall. The moment I first saw them in the kitchen, the moment the storm forced us into the same room with nothing but candlelight and quiet conversation. I started faltering. I didn't plan on caring about you. They froze. Not startled, not angry. Just still, waiting, listening. I know that sounds strange, I continued, feeling my cheeks burn. You're a stranger, and you've been here, what, a week? Maybe 2? And yet... I stopped, swallowed hard, and yet I can't ignore it anymore. They stepped closer, but not too close, their hands empty. Their presence steady, safe, frail. I feel the same, they said softly. My chest tightened, relieving terror at the same time. You do. Yeah, they admitted. It's weird, unexpected. And I didn't plan it, but I can't deny it either. We stood there, 2 people in a small kitchen, saying words neither of us had expected to say, words that changed the air around us without screaming, without forcing the world to notice. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no sudden kisses or proclamations, just honesty, vulnerability. A quiet recognition that, despite all the reasons to stay apart, we'd begun to matter to each other. I don't know how this happened, I said, exhaling. I didn't even want it to. Neither did I, they replied, but here we are. That simple admission felt heavier than I could have imagined, heavier than months of loneliness. Heavier than nights spent staring at the ceiling, listening to a stranger breathe, and yet lighter, because finally the tension I'd carried in my chest began to loosen. Not completely, not instantly, but enough that I could breathe without pretending it didn't matter. We moved to sit across from each other at the small kitchen table. The only light from the faint lamp overhead. Quietly, carefully, we shared the story of our days, our exhaustion, our past disappointments. No one tried to fix anything. No one judged, just listening. And in that quiet, I understood something crucial. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or perfect timing. Sometimes it slips in slowly, unexpectedly, between walls, between routines, between the tiny moments that pass unnoticed until suddenly they define everything. That night, I let myself feel it fully, not just the curiosity, the awareness, the comfort, but the truth, the fact that I was falling for the stranger in the next room. They were listening, attentive, present. Their eyes held no expectation, no demand, only acknowledgement, only acceptance. And that was because Silao, I realized, doesn't always need a grand entrance. Sometimes it just appears quietly, slowly, in the night, in the shared silence of two people who didn't plan it, but suddenly couldn't ignore it. We didn't move closer. We didn't hug. We didn't promise anything. Not yet. But we admitted the truth, and in the admission, the world outside faded for a moment. The stress, the chaos, the fear, it all became background noise to the presence in front of me. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. The days that followed that quiet confession felt surreal. Nothing changed outwardly. We still moved around the house in the same careful ways, avoiding intrusion, keeping our shared spaces comfortable and respectful. But everything had shifted beneath the surface. I noticed everything now. The way they paused by the window when the sunlight hit just right. The little crease in their forehead when they concentrated on a task. The soft exhale after a long day. Every small human motion became a point of attention, a marker of their presence in my life. I caught myself listening for their footsteps, not out of irritation or curiosity anymore, but because it had become comforting, safe. One evening, I returned home to find them sitting on the couch, book in hand, lamp casting a golden glow around their features. I paused in the doorway, watching, feeling something I hadn't allowed myself to name yet. "Hey," I said softly, trying not to disturb the quiet. They looked up, and the faintest smile appeared. "Hey!" I sat down across from them, just far enough to maintain space, but close enough to feel the warmth in the room. "You've been quiet today," I said. They shook their head. "Not quiet, just reflective." We shared a pause. The kind that doesn't need words, where presence alone communicates more than speech ever could. I keep thinking about that night. The storm, I admitted finally, when we ended up sitting there with candlelight. My voice trailed, unsure of how to finish. "You felt it too," they said softly. "Yes," I whispered. The word hung between us, fragile and alive. And then, somehow, the hesitation broke. I leaned forward slightly, hand brushing against theirs on the table. Neither of us pulled away. Not immediately. Not yet. But the connection was undeniable. We spent the night talking. Really talking. Not about work or errands. Not about mundane things to fill the air, about life, about what we'd been through, about the loneliness that had shaped us before we crossed paths, about fear, about hope, about wanting something, even someone, without knowing how to ask for it. I learned that they had scars too, emotional ones, invisible but heavy, that made them wary of attachment. And I shared mine, the quiet fears and the subtle hurts that had been tucked away for too long. There were moments of laughter, too, the kind that bubbles up unexpectedly, catching your chest in its warmth. Moments of silence that felt safe. Not awkward, moments of awareness, of feeling understood without explanation. At some point, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not in the way I had been, not the tight-chested, hyper-aware, cautious fear I carried. In the early days, this was different. This was the fear of possibility. The possibility that I could let someone in and it could be okay. That someone could exist in my life without taking over it, without consuming it, without harming me. And the astonishing truth, it felt real. It felt possible. By the end of the night, when we finally stood to leave the kitchen, I noticed my chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. The house no longer felt like a temporary space. It felt like something shared, something alive, something waiting to grow. We didn't hold hands. We didn't kiss. We didn't make promises. We didn't need to. The honesty, the shared vulnerability, the simple acknowledgement that we mattered to each other. It was enough. And for the first time, I understood that intimacy doesn't always begin with dramatic gestures. Sometimes it begins quietly, slowly, in shared silence, in the presence of someone who listens, someone who notices, someone who stays. And when you realize that the stranger next door is no longer a stranger at all, it changes everything. By the time a few weeks had passed, everything felt different. The house no longer seemed temporary. The walls that had once separated us now held memories, laughter, quiet moments of shared understanding. The stranger in the next room, the one I had feared noticing, feared needing, was no longer a stranger at all. I found myself smiling more, lashing more, and even enjoying the little mundane things that had once been hollow. Morning coffee in the kitchen, brushing past them in the hallway, sitting quietly in the living room with the faint hum of life around us. And then one night, it happened naturally, without planning, without pressure. We found ourselves both awake, lingering in the same room long after the lights were dim. They looked at me and said softly, "I never thought I'd feel this comfortable with someone I barely knew." I chuckled, nervous, heart pounding. Me, neither. A pause, a shared smile. I think I've wanted this, they admitted, for a long time, but I didn't know how to let it happen. My chest tightened. I think I did too, and I didn't want to admit it. For the first time, the fear that had hovered over Usta, fear of caring, the fear of attachment, the fear of vulnerability, in its place was something else. Something unspoken, yet undeniable. We leaned toward each other slowly, as if testing the air between us, the space that had always been there but had never been crossed. And then, finally, our hands met. It was simply quiet, real. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. Just two people acknowledging what had already become undeniable, that we mattered, that we were no longer strangers, that we had become important to each other in ways neither of us expected. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in quiet moments, in shared spaces, in the soft acknowledgement of another person's presence in your life. The stranger who had once been just a name, a room number, a temporary neighbor had become the most important person in my life. My confidant, my anchor, my unexpected home. We spent the rest of the night talking, laughing, sharing pieces of ourselves we hadn't dared to reveal before, about fears, about hopes, about dreams we had tucked away, about life in its messy, unpredictable, beautiful entirety. And when I went to bed that night, lying in the quiet, knowing they were just a wall away, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Because sometimes the person who changes your life the most isn't the one you see coming. They're the one who arrives quietly, patiently, without asking permission, and gradually becomes everything you didn't know you were looking for. I no longer feared attachment. I no longer feared caring. I had learned that opening yourself to someone, even a stranger, can be terrifying. But it can also be the most rewarding thing in the world. And that's the story. From strangers sharing a house to two people who had slowly, quietly, carefully allowed themselves to matter to each other. From walls that separated us to hands that finally connected. From fear to trust. From silence to love. So, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this. Don't underestimate the quiet moments. Don't ignore the small connections that seem insignificant at first. Life has a way of surprising us. And sometimes, the person who will change your world the most is someone you didn't expect at all. If this story touched you even a little, share it. Tell someone who needs to hear that love can arrive quietly, unexpectedly, and beautifully. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because there's always another night, another whisper, another unexpected connection waiting to be discovered. Like, share, and subscribe. And remember, the magic of connection often comes when you least expect it.